Just going back again, and I'll go back to my document for this, and going back to this thing about the swine flu. And then there's a lot of important stuff I think people need to know here in relation to this, because I suspected that the swine flu was a scam, and it all blew over and everyone kind of just forgot about it 11 years ago now. And then whilst I was putting this document together, I thought, right, this is an opportune moment to go and check whether the swine flu pandemic really was a scam or not. And it's in the figures. It's on the Office of National Statistics website. All you need to do is download 3 spreadsheets, or as many as you like actually, but I downloaded the 2008 spreadsheet for the breakdown of deaths in 2008, 2009, 2010, and which of those 3 years has the lowest number of total deaths. You'll see there it is 2009, where the alleged swine flu pandemic took place. There was no pandemic. There were lower deaths in that year than in each year either side of it. That is not a pandemic. It's not an epidemic. It's a scam. And then, of course, I think quite a few people that have latched onto this have rightly latched onto the Event 201, which is this thing that took place in October 2019, 6 weeks before the first case. I recommend that people watch this video, which is on YouTube. Just put Event 201 and you'll get their video highlights. They're not trying to hide it now, they're just flaunting it.
It began in healthy-looking pigs, months, perhaps years ago. A new coronavirus spread silently within herds. Experts agree unless it is quickly controlled, it could lead to a severe pandemic, an outbreak that circles the globe and affects people everywhere.
We're at the start of what's looking like it will be a severe pandemic. And there are problems emerging that can only be solved by global business and governments working together. How should national leaders, businesses, and international organizations balance the risk of worsening disease that would be caused by the continued movement of people around the world against the risks of profound economic consequence of travel and trade bans?
We are not out of money yet, but the fact is we are trending in a dangerous direction and something needs to change.
So the policy question for this board now is, how should financial resources be prioritized? Are there nodes that we cannot allow to fail? What is your sense of priorities? We don't have money to pay for all of these urgent problems.
Countries are reacting in different ways as to how best to manage the overwhelming amounts of dis and misinformation circulating over the internet. In some cases, limited internet shutdowns are being implemented to quell panic.
How much control of information should there be, and by whom? And how can false information be effectively challenged?
One thing we haven't spoken about, and I'm wondering whether it's time to talk about this, is a step up from the part of the governments on enforcement actions against fake news.
The outcome of the CAPS pandemic in Event 201 was catastrophic. So are we, as a global community, now finally ready to do the hard work needed to prepare for the next pandemic?
Richard D. Hall, he put this into that video he did about a week ago. You can go and watch the highlights that he put in there, and they talk about, for example, censorship of the internet, the limiting the flow of misinformation, which of course we've seen a little bit of that on Facebook with this fact-checking bot. You're putting a banner over things. I've had a couple of my posts that have been botted. A few other people have. You can actually get rid of that block. I can't remember how to do it, but it's relatively straightforward. We've had YouTube videos that have been deleted. One of my videos about this got deleted that I recorded with somebody about a month ago. That got taken off my account with no real reason, just saying against community guidelines. We can see what they're up to. They're actually doing this exercise. They're following that exercise. They're looking at what will happen economically, and we've seen some of the things that are happening. And that's a whole other, ballpark that we can get into there. Should we get into that? But they basically told us, and then you can go back to this Rockefeller document from 2010, this strategic applications for technology. I forget what the exact title is. Other people, I'm sure, will be already familiar with that. The Rockefeller Foundation predicted that there would be this pandemic in 2012 or something, and it's exactly what's playing out now.
Scenarios for the future of technology and international development. I'm going to skip down to page 18 and just read a few paragraphs and tell me if what we're seeing today isn't pretty much what they wanted all along. Page 18 starts, lockstep, a world of tighter top-down government control and more authoritarian leadership with limited innovation and growing citizen pushback. Remember, this was written in 2010. They write, in 2012, the pandemic that the world has been anticipating for years finally hit. Unlike 2009's H1N1, this new influenza strain originating from wild geese was extremely virulent and deadly. Even the most pandemic-prepared nations were quickly overwhelmed when the virus streaked around the world, infecting nearly 20% of the global population and killing 8 million in just 7 months. The majority of them healthy young adults. The pandemic also had a deadly effect on economies. International mobility of both people and goods screeched to a halt, debilitating industries like tourism and breaking global supply chains. Even locally, normally bustling shops and office buildings sat empty for months, devoid of both employees and customers. They say the Chinese government's quick imposition and enforcement of mandatory quarantine for all citizens, as well as its instant near hermetic sealing off of all borders, saved millions of lives, stopping the spread of the virus from earlier than in other countries and enabling a swifter post-pandemic recovery. China's government was not the only one that took extreme measures to protect its citizens from risk and exposure. During the pandemic, national leaders around the world flexed their authority and imposed airtight rules and restrictions, from the mandatory wearing of face masks to body temperature checks at the entries to communal spaces like train stations and supermarkets. Even after the pandemic faded, this more authoritarian control and oversight of citizens and their activities stuck and even intensified. But the end game is more unilateral power, more unchecked power, and more control by the government, by the corporations, and I would note, more bailouts for the banks. Now again, friends, that was from the 2010 document from the Rockefeller Foundation.
And Rockefeller's a big developers in the early years of the World Health Organization, aren't they, as well?
Exactly.
It's all tied in, isn't it, really?
It is. And they actually declared this war on coronavirus. That was declared, I think, maybe a month ago or something by one of the US people, I think. And it's this militaristic, characterization. War on this, the war on drugs, the war on terror, the war on coronavirus. In other words, you've got to attack it with something. Well, what are we going to attack it with? We're going to attack it with a vaccine, which we'll come to shortly. And that's the whole model of allopathic medicine. It's a military model. You have a disease, you have to fight it with something. You don't work with the disease to kind of like come out with a synergistic effect to cure it, to get rid of it. You have to attack it with something. You attack it with antibiotics, anti-life. You attack cancer with chemotherapy. You poison it. You don't say, well, how can we maybe give the cancer cells some different type of nutrition so that they go away, which is kind of more getting towards the complementary approach. And that all comes from the Rockefellers as well. That whole allopathic medicine model, this military model of medicine, that comes essentially from the Rockefeller Foundation, really. And Fauci, again, he said January 20th, it was in January 2017. I don't have the exact date. Trump was inaugurated on the 20th of January 2017. And Fauci said, there is no question that there will be a challenge to the incoming administration in the arena of infectious diseases. That's Fauci, who's the guy that's been on the TV now in 2017. How do you know?
Nostradamus.
Nostradamus, yeah, obviously. He can't have looked at his tea leaves because he's an American and they drink coffee. So you're right, must have been Nostradamus.
Because he read the script when he was amending the script, didn't he? You know, we'll have this 3 years from now. Yeah, that'll work. Fucking wankers. Excuse the language.
Yeah.
It's always in plain sight, isn't it? For anyone who wants to look at this, this is it. They have to always have it there. It's like, yeah, it's all psychological, a lot of it, you know.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's, you know, and once you get people into a state of fear, you know, and I think the really sad thing is that, you know, I mean, I work for the Open University, and you know, and no one I know in the universities that we're getting all these updates, and they're just following the narrative, you know, and none of these. There should be people, you know, there's basic things like you don't quarantine healthy people. You never do that. It's basic stuff according to their own science of immunology. They're implicitly assuming that somehow everyone magically already has this virus, even though they've never been to China or anywhere like that. It's just ridiculous. You don't. In other words, in a hospital, if somebody's got a disease, you don't let the person walk around the hospital with a disease and quarantine everyone else. It's the other way round. So again, you get this occult inversion of logic, if I can put it in that. You invert things. You make everything inverted, and that's a big theme in this whole scam. It's inverted from what it should be.
In any scam that's going on, it's all inverted. Yeah.
Exactly. But then going on to some other things like, you know, people are dying of something. I'm not disputing that, and people have lost relatives. But you know, even that can be challenged because there are treatments available. Like one that's been talked about quite a bit in the last couple of weeks is this hydroxychloroquine, and chloroquine is a drug that was used to treat malaria, and now it's fallen out of use a bit. I think they try and get these new drugs into use because of new patents and patents expiring on drugs, and they need to make money because it's a business concern. It's not about being altruistically, oriented to, help people get better. And this chloroquine is a patent expired drug. It's been tested in several studies. Some in France, I think, and it was talked about as early as February 2020, so that's nearly 2 months ago now. And some people in the US have been treated with it, apparently very successfully. But then in the media, they've tried to debunk it and say that it's no good and it's toxic. No, it isn't. It was used as an anti-malarial for years and years. And this apparently has been quite successful. But no, that's not the treatment they want, is it? They don't want people to be treated with that because that would override what they really want, which of course we've already mentioned, the vaccinations.
Yeah.
That's what they want.
This is a landmark collaboration to accelerate the development, production, and equitable distribution of vaccines, diagnostics, and therapeutics for COVID-19.
We look forward to supporting the Global Coronavirus Response Summit on the 4th of May, which will drive forward our collective global effort to tackle coronavirus. It will ensure that desperately needed resources for research and development of new vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostics are made available so that we can overcome this disease.
We need to develop a vaccine. We need to produce it and to deploy it in every single corner of the world and make it available at affordable prices.
In order to counter COVID-19, we need vaccines.
The eventual end comes when we get a vaccine. The eventual end comes when we get a vaccine. The eventual end comes when we get a vaccine. And we need to make sure that gets out to everyone in the world.
And this is what it's about. And and again, they're letting it all hang out. And if you go and watch on the 12th of April, this was, I think it's still on, I'll just see if they've still got it on their website. I'll just click on this link, see if it comes up. I think it's still there. Let's see if it comes up. Microsoft founder Bill Gates discusses the global fight against coronavirus. 12th of April, BBC, 17-minute interview, right? In fact, I could probably, let's see if we might even be able to get this to play. I know it's kind of a bit horrible having to listen to this not very nice person, if I put it like that. Let's see. Right, so I've got it queued up. Let me just...
I am in fact a fucking puppet.
But there will be a trade-off. We'll have less safety testing than we typically would have. And so governments will have to decide, do they indemnify the companies and really say, let's go out with this when we just don't have the time to do what we normally do. So 18 months is about what we'd expect. We're doing everything we can. We'll write checks for those factories faster than governments can, and they'll come along. It definitely shouldn't be money limited. It should be, all the best constructs, full speed ahead, science limited.
So he's talking about rushing this vaccine through in 18 months. According to the standard sort of way of doing things, it can take up to 10 years to make a vaccine. So he's talking about rushing it through, and then if you noticed, and it's easy to miss it if you just sort of not looking at the details, he says, well, if governments want to grow, in fact, I'll go back to the words now. People like myself and Tony Fauci are saying 18 months. If everything went perfectly, we could do slightly better than that, but there would be a trade-off. We'll have less safety testing than we typically have, so governments will have to decide, do they indemnify the companies and really say, let's go out with this when we just don't have the time to do what we normally do? So what he's acknowledging is that the vaccine probably isn't going to be safe, but he's not saying that the companies will pay for the damages, the governments have to do it. So that's what he's saying. And then he says, oh, you have to charge mostly a break-even price for things that are helping out with a global crisis like this. So it's a business arrangement. It's not about saving the world, And then, of course, he's into this ID 2020 thing, this digital identity program. That's another of his projects. And he talks about having quantum dot tattoos.
Yeah.
So they'll be able to put information on there for people to say, what information about them can be put into these quantum dots. How about, have they got coronavirus? Have they been immunized? And look who he's partnered with, Rockefeller Foundation and Gavi, this vaccination organization, and Accenture and the UN, And then this is a key one. It's all part of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. It's all part of that, which is how they're going to track people, smart cities, Agenda 21, Agenda 2030. So what you're seeing is that this coronavirus scam is kind of like enabling more of the Agenda 21 type stuff to be put into place. For example, we've already seen talk about how the shutdown, with less flights and stuff and all that and less travel, that's helping climate change. It's not as bad now. The skies are clearer, da-de-da. Well, sorry, folks, why don't you find out about free energy and how clear the skies could be if they let that stuff come out?
Throughout the history of science, anytime there is something that is very threatening to the established ideas, such as Galileo's revelations through the telescope and his idea, following on others, that the Earth goes around the sun, not vice versa, continental drift, all sorts of claims that ultimately became validated, the initial reaction of science is to say this is nonsense and to reject it and not even to look at the data. And I would say that the cold fusion and free energy or new energy phenomena are so threatening to the underpinnings of modern physics and chemistry and all other sciences that you get the expected intensely negative reaction. The future of the world, as seen by conventional thinkers or even many far-reaching thinkers, is tame compared to what a cold fusion and free energy is going to do. No aspect of human culture will be untouched by this energy revolution. The very fact that the material that covers 70% of the planet's surface will now be available as a fuel source, and the fact that water makes up a huge percentage of our bodies, and this is a fuel and a source of energy, this is going to have incredible psychological and religious and historical and geopolitical implications. The Middle East picture and the strength of the oil interests there is going to be drastically altered. Air pollution will be abolished in most cities that are now affected by the internal combustion engine. And space travel, which is a favorite subject of mine, will be transformed.
In this remarkable series of video clips shot by Hutchison, we see what happens when he fine-tunes the electromagnetic frequencies aimed at target objects in his garage.
On the subatomic level, I feel that there is a dimension shift activated by very conventional electrostatics, RF fields that I use, and Tesla waves that I use, that actually form a keyway that opens up another area of time and space that may activate the zero-point energy field.
The energy question is fundamental to everything. Once you have free energy, you can have as much clean water as you need, you can build as taller buildings as you need, you can have whatever propulsion systems that you need.
If we have free energy, abundant energy for as much as anybody wants, somebody can use 10 times as much as the next person. It doesn't matter. Why fight about anything? There's no reason to even have wars, much less have to annihilate anybody.
No need for silly jobs anymore. They wouldn't be necessary. Everybody would have all the heat and cooling and fuel and light and electricity they ever needed free. So society would have this paradigm shattering shift.
It will completely transform the nature of our society. It will change the whole geopolitical structure of the world. It is the single most dangerous thing to the existing status quo, is the energy issue. It's them that's ruined the world, not us, folks. We haven't done it. You know, do your homework a bit more, dig a bit deeper. And that includes people who have realised that the virus is a scam, but they don't know any of the other stuff. You know.
And again, you could link in 9/11 again with Dr. Judy Wood's work. It's there all along the line, you know.
Absolutely. And then we move on, really. When you start looking at the vaccine thing and also the sort of science behind it, as it were, at least in relation to this current scam, is you start finding out these connections to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which Richard went through in that video he did, but somebody had already pointed out to me, and I think there was one thing which I just checked up on. I didn't really find it, which I'll mention in a minute. But the guy that's actually responsible for the panic in the UK, or is you know, said to be responsible, and I think it's probably a reasonably fair characterization, is this Professor Neil Ferguson from Imperial College. And again, he said, oh, we've got this computer model of how the pandemic, you know, will actually develop, and there's going to be 500,000 people who are going to die in the UK from this. 500,000 people, he said. This wasn't based on science. It was based on a C program that he wrote a few years ago of undocumented code, and he's even admitted that this code, he didn't even document it. He didn't sort of put in all the comments and say how it would work. He said he wrote it years ago for flu pandemic, so he didn't I don't think he even bothered to tweak it based on any data which had come through as regards to whatever's supposed to have happened in China. He just ran this simulation, came out with a figure of 500,000 deaths in over 6 months or a year or whatever, and he put that into some report, and that was then fed to Boris Johnson. Boris, if you don't do this, 500,000 people are going to die. You know, and they've done this in just about every country, something similar. Then you look at Neil Ferguson's background, and he is on the management team of the Vaccine Impact Modelling Consortium, him being into computer models. And the group is overseen or even funded by BMGF, which is the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So he has received money via the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for some of his research into pandemics and so forth.
It's like they do each other's dirty work, don't they?
Yeah. But it's all done under this guise of philanthropy and helping people. And this wonderful philanthropist called Bill Gates has made all this money out of Windows operating system and Microsoft services, and he's helping people get vaccinated because it's good for them, And then you move to Chris Whitty. And I'd never heard of these people. He's the UK's chief medical officer, and he was also involved in this SAGE, which is the Scientific Advisory Group for Emergencies Committee, and they're actually making sort of recommendations for lockdown and how long that should stay in and stuff. Guess what? In The Guardian, you can read he was awarded $40 million by the BMGF in 2008 for something to do with malaria research. So he's also a benefactor of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Sorry?
And then you go on Matt Hancock.
That's right. Matthew Hancock. Yep. So that's right. So you're absolutely right. UK Secretary of State for Health, Matthew Hancock. Again, I didn't know who he was until about 2 weeks ago, so I don't watch the news, I don't watch TV. I'm not interested in politicians because they're all, in other words, there's too many corrupt politicians. There's probably some good ones out there, some good guys, some good women, but they just don't stand a chance against all the others, really. To be honest, and the forces that actually pull the strings. But Matthew Hancock, he is a 75% shareholder in Porton Biopharma Limited, company number 09331560. It's on the Companies House website, public information. And that company lists 2 products on their website. It's the sole manufacturer of Erwinaze, which is used in acute lymphoblastic leukemia treatments, a type of cancer which affects children, and it's used in treatment protocols in conjunction with radiotherapy and chemotherapy. And then the other product they sell is the UK's, the sole manufacturer of the UK's licensed anthrax vaccine. So the clue is in the word vaccine there. And then I found, I think actually Mark Conlon found this, I found the image and I traced it to a source. We've got a picture. In fact, I'll just go back to my screen share again momentarily so all the viewers can see this to save them going to check it out for themselves. So let's just do that. And you can see this picture. In fact, I can just click on the link of Mr. Hancock and Mr. Gates, and you will see when this comes up, there it is on Matt Hancock's own personal Facebook profile. What's the caption? The caption reads, "Terrific to meet Bill Gates at the WF," which means the World Economic Forum. Terrific to meet Bill Gates at the World Economic Forum today to discuss the importance of tackling antimicrobial resistance, at the global level. So there you are. There we have a tenuous connection maybe, but nevertheless we can see that he's moving in. Sorry?
We should all be clapping now.
Doing the demented seal impression. So there you are. That basically shows you, the dimensions of the scam, parts of how it's being run, who's involved, at least some of the players. Yes, anybody that's listening to this or watching this, if they've lost a relative, they've gone into hospital, I'm sorry for that. And we as people don't mean to kind of, we're in the same situation with 9/11. You can't tell the truth about 9/11 because it'll upset the victims. You're dishonoring the people that died, all these firefighters that died or whatever, or you're dishonoring the people that have died in the NHS, because apparently we've heard these stories of nurses that have died. In fact, somebody mentioned that to me the other day, that a couple of nurses or a doctor had died or something. And I said, well, I've heard this, but can you send me the story? And no link came back, unfortunately, on that one. And maybe staff have died, but just because an NHS nurse has died doesn't mean to say they died of coronavirus infection. We don't know. It might mean they died of something, and again, they get tested and the test comes back positive, but as I've already said, the test is not reliable. So anything that comes with that sort of associated with it needs to be checked. And in fact, I think now might be a good point to go to a story which was sent to me, or not sent to me actually. There's a lady who's on my Facebook friends list. She's publicly put this on Facebook. So I'm not, you can go and find it. I think all her friends can see it, and I shall read out this story because it's a pretty, it kind of, I think really it draws together everything that I've just gone through into one kind of anecdote. So this is I'm putting this into an update because I've been doing these updates on the website, which I'll tell you about. The text might come out quite small, but I'm going to read it out. I've been wanting to share this with you. This is Nikki for a few days, and she just posted it on Facebook. She didn't send this to me specifically, but I needed to focus on events that were unfolding. My dad, 86, was taken into Winchester Hospital late on Monday night. My worst nightmare. We assumed it was another UTI, which is a urinary tract infection for those that don't know what that is. But because he had breathing difficulties, which is normal for him, and apparently a slight cough, you can imagine what the doctors were thinking. He was put into the hot A&E area in A&E, which had been designated suspected COVID-19. I spoke to a nurse who told me they would be taking a swab. I made it very clear that his symptoms were exactly like last time. But in other words, you'd better not make any SH1T up. He was put into the, I was in such a state, as you can imagine. I had to get him out of there as quickly as possible. Most of my family are fast asleep, which made things much harder as they weren't on board with my concerns. I rang back just gone midnight as I'd forgotten to tell them not to give him morphine at any stage. That's the lights out drug. A doctor came onto the phone. I removed my conspiracy hat and proceeded. He said a number of times he didn't think Dad had CV. I said good, because there's no way he has it. He and his wife have been at home for weeks and weeks by themselves. I asked what was the last test they were using. PCR. He explained a bit about it, so that confirms that it's a PCR test that they're using. I said, that makes no sense whatsoever. He said, I know, but it does. I said, I know it doesn't, perhaps. He said, he then couldn't wait to discuss CPR. I asked him if he was, if this was usual practice. He said, yes, because my dad was old and frail. Funny that this has never been discussed in May 19 when he was last in hospital. So they never classed him as old and frail a year ago. I said, he must be given CPR no matter what. He tried to dissuade me, but I held him. He then went on to say that because Dad was old and frail, he wouldn't be taken to ICU and after CPR was given. So she said that. So I said, you just leave him to die. He said he'd already explained it was because he was old and frail. He said he would make a note of my wishes. But should a doctor decide it was not in my dad's best interests, they would override my decision anyway. And here's the best bit. I asked what would happen if anything happened to my dad. As I'd been hearing all sorts of things, he confirmed it would be recorded as COVID. I said, how could that be right? You just told me you didn't think he has it. He said he could catch it whilst he's in and here as he's in a high-risk environment. I thought, I'm not having that, so I went on with my conspiracy hat. I've been hearing you can't catch a virus. Silence, and this gets on to this idea of non-infectious diseases, which is to do with this. He, of course, said that was wrong and you can catch them. I mentioned the germ versus the terrain theory, which is about this evidence, really, that your body becomes ill because of toxification and things in the environment, not because of bacteria and viruses. And these are actually produced within your own body as a response to toxification or stress or injury of some kind. I don't think he'd ever heard of that, the doctor, and that's probably true because I don't think they really taught it. I continued tactfully. There have been a large number of highly respected doctors who are coming out and saying that what we are being told is not correct. I'm very confused. He assured me not to worry, blah, blah. I left it there and didn't want to jeopardize Dad's care. I just hoped I'd said enough to avoid anything being skewed. Nikki continues. He got taken to the ward early hours of Tuesday morning. Swab came back negative, but they took another one. So they tested him twice. Desperate to get people positive, aren't they? Mm-hmm. When I asked why, the nurse said the first one could have been a false positive. Don't you just love those words? I asked her how long the incubation period was. She didn't know. And it's apparently 14 days, isn't it? I think it's either 14 or 21 days. Dad continued to make good progress, and they were looking at discharge. I was concerned they might change their mind if the second swab miraculously came back positive, or would have keep him there until they got a positive result. I was assured the result wouldn't have any bearing on the discharge, so if he did have it, it was okay for him to come back home and self-isolate for 2 weeks. So that would apparently be the incubation period, I presume. Gave it to me and his wife. I could then pass it on to others. Nice, eh? What a joke. I thought it was a deadly virus that was wiping thousands and thousands out globally. Most of the world was on lockdown as a result. Hello? Long story short, Dad responded well to the antibiotics, yes I know, and took him home yesterday. So this was... Nikki posted this story either last night or this morning, so that would have been Thursday. Now here comes the interesting bit. Whilst waiting to pick Dad up, he was wheeled out to me as I wasn't allowed in. She wasn't allowed into the hospital to get him, which I was gutted about. I spotted an ambulance driver sat on a bench. He got up and was walking past me, so I thought, here's my chance. I decided not to get the mic and notebook out, and I, of course, removed my conspiracy hat. I asked him how was everything. Was he busy? I think you know the answer was no. The wards had been cleared, patients sent home in readiness for big influx, and it never came. And it's been quiet ever since. He actually said the government statistics are inaccurate, and people are dying of other things, but their deaths are being recorded as COVID. His words, I was gobsmacked. The clapping thing was a bit of an embarrassment because most of the nurses had little or nothing to do. I asked him about the nurses dancing, and he said yes, this was happening. Southampton had done it. I said, how did they have time to learn the routines during this pandemic? He gave me a yes, I know look. He added, it was a moral boost. I suppose it's boring as hell having nothing to do all day. He did say he had to be careful what he said as he was in uniform, but he didn't believe what the government was saying. He went on to say there wasn't enough PPE for everyone. I'm not sure what that means. One of you guys maybe know what that means. Yeah, the government.
Gear, isn't it?
What's that? Sorry.
The protective gear. I think it's.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. The government found money to pay people for not working. He showed me the mask he was using, and I burst out laughing. You don't actually think that's going to save you, do you? He agreed they were rubbish. Some of his colleagues had goggles, full face masks, and suits. He then went on to talk about social distancing, which he thought was a good thing. So I said, you honestly think germs are going to stop dead in their tracks at 2 meters? They actually project a lot further, which in fact he did agree with. He did think that there was a virus, which is totally understandable, I guess. He said his friend's dad died. How do you know it was a virus and not something else? He couldn't answer that. A bit earlier on, he actually said people were dying all the time anyway, of the flu as well. I said, how come none of you have got it, and key workers too? He couldn't answer that either. I mentioned the 201 virus simulation in the latter part of last year. Do you think that was a little odd, convenient? He'd not heard of that, and he was a lovely, friendly guy. And then she goes on to report, and then she concludes and she says, basically, because of just about everything I've been reading and hearing, it's true. It's one big lie, plandemic, pantomime, whatever you want to call it, and the masses are still falling for it, blindly believing every bit of BS and lies that the government and media, TV and radio are spewing. Worrying times for sure. So there you are. I don't really think that I can sort of add to that, because that just about, that draws everything together. That this is a scam, and it's nothing to do with the virus. Yes, there might be a sort of slightly worse flu illness going around, but I think most of the deaths are caused either by this slightly worse flu illness, or they're being caused by stress and what's going to happen to the suicide rate with all these businesses that can no longer be in business. What about all the families that are now under pressure, families that don't get on very well? We've got 4 people in our house here now, my son, my daughter and my wife and me, and we all get on pretty well. We've got enough space here, thankfully. We're in a semi-rural community. We can wander out. We haven't seen any police around here, thank goodness. It's quite a nice area. We can wander up to the shops, we can wander up to the post office. It's okay, but what about the inner cities where there's, supermarkets run out quickly and you can't get enough food, you know, you're all on top of each other. There's, you know, you can't go out, you know.
I mean, there's a lot of people saying there are going to be more people suffering and dying from these measures, these lockdowns, than you know, anything else. You know,
absolutely.
It's ridiculous, you know, but people are just accepting it.
The first post I ever saw, and I went, you know, this does not add up. You don't crush the world economy to save, even if you were saving 10 million lives, you do not crash the world economy. That alone makes you go, what is going on behind this?
Yes.
We're talking about the Tory government. For the last 8 years, we had austerity for what, 8 years? Where the cutback on social services, healthcare, mental health care, the NHS, sold anything they could sell. And now they go, we're desperate to save a population of 60 to 90-year-olds because we love you so much.
And even that last statement you made there, that's again what they put out in the media. But if we read that story from Nicky, they didn't want to resuscitate the guy. They said they weren't going to resuscitate him if he got into difficulties.
Yeah.
So that even contradicts that as well.
Of course.
You know.
Yeah.